Welcome everyone. It's so great again to be connected here. I'm Nathan, and I am helping with getting the introductions going of amazing MBT people because I've been realizing just through the relationships and friendships I've built in this community, first of all, how amazing the people are in this community and just their unique talents and gifts that they're offering out into the world and maybe even more importantly, just who they are, in their everyday, day to day lives and their ways they interact. So I've been so blessed to be getting to know these folks. And then as I get to know one person, I ask, oh, maybe you know this other person. And they're like, no, I actually don't. So again, that's a little bit of the inspiration of this podcast, if you want to call it that, to get to know some of these MBT peeps and what they're up to in the world and let that be a way of introducing them to others. So it's my great honor and privilege to be meeting with you today, Michael, and I'll let you introduce yourself here.
Yeah, hi, I'm Michael Saganski. I'm 36 years old. I live in Canada. Been a fan of MBT for over 10 years. Busy with, a wife and two kids, a dog, and I'm a computer engineer by trade, although I've kind of recently, semi-retired, kind of part of the financially independent, retired early movement, if you want to get into that later. So I've been kind of figuring out where I want to take life from here, and I've been kind of trying to be more active in the MBT community as part of that, and yeah, it's kind of led me here. So nice to see you, Nathan.
Yeah, thank you again for agreeing to do this, Michael. I've been super stoked since we've set this time up together a couple weeks ago. I've been really looking forward to it. And, right off the bat, there's just some things that just like are sparkles for me that I'm like, ooh, something shiny. I want to go that direction. And, really, I guess we'll start with your MBT journey. Like you said, like over 10 years ago, wow, already, like MBT has been growing, especially these last few years, YouTube channel audience is really getting up there. And, we're talking about like the days of the forum probably, over 10 years ago, right?
Mhm.
And so would love to hear like how did you get involved with MBT and the forum? What's the journey there?
Yeah, there's a bit of a story there. It's yeah, it's interesting. This is going back to, I don't know, the early 2000s. Uh, I was kind of into techno electronic music way back in the day, and there was a band or a group, I guess, called Astral Projection. And so I searched that term on Google and just trying to find the group just to learn more about them or whatever. I had no idea what that term meant. And, Google search results come up, and turns out there's a lot more to astral projection than this electronic music group, right? So I was like, what is this? I started investigating it, and I'm like, wow, this is neat. People are either, crazy or there's something else going on here. So started looking more into it. It kind of piqued my curiosity. And I started looking for books on it, and came across Robert Monroe's books, Journeys Out of the Body, Far Journeys, all that stuff. Read them all, and tried to find out more about it. Came across the Monroe Institute and learned more about them, kind of signed up to their newsletter. I ended up going to a gateway experience at one point. But in their newsletter, at one point, there was one of the sections they talked about Thomas Campbell, and I guess he had given a presentation there, and that this was, one of the original. This is the original Thomas Campbell from the Robert Monroe books, TC in the books. And I was like, oh wow, he's still alive and still going, and he's still, promoting this stuff, and he's got a website, and he's got a model of reality. And I started looking into that, and I was like, oh geez, this is my big toe, my big theory of everything. And I was just kind of blown away with the sales pitch anyways on the website. And ordered the books right away, and yeah, I read them. It took a while. It's a tough slog, but it was mind blowing to me. I had at one point I had one of those you know, belief system crashes or whatever, where I was disoriented for days. I remember just even getting on the bus after work and just like kind of everything was in a haze, and I was just like, everything is different now. And yeah, I just was enamored with the whole theory. It really spoke to me. So I just wanted to get more involved and learn more about it. And went back to the website and discovered that there was a forum, and that, you know, oh, Tom's actually has, you know, posted on here. He's actually contributing and talking to, you know, just anybody that wants to have a discussion about My Big Toe. So I was around 2009, 2010, and there was already a treasure trove of threads on that website that I read and got involved with, and, you know, started talking to people, started asking questions, and yeah, took up meditation at that point, and you know, kind of really begun my spiritual journey from that point on. I participated on that forum for a few years. I actually helped create the wiki there. There's still a wiki on the My Big Toe website.
Yeah. Massive resource, totally.
Yeah. And, you know, kind of got busy then after that for a while with real life PMR things. I got married and had children, and that kind of pulled me away for a while. Things were pretty busy for a while with work and family life. So, you know, I kind of always kind of paid attention to what Tom was doing and watched the videos, but kind of disconnected my participation there for a while. You know, still tried to keep the principles in mind throughout daily life, and but, you know, eventually life kind of calmed down a bit, and the last 6 months to a year, I've kind of dove back in head first, really trying to live it day to day, and yeah, find myself here today. So that's kind of my story.
Wow. You know, what a journey, Michael. You know, to think it was, you know, like techno dance music, you know, and it's just the astral projection name of the group, and you know, to go from you know, because many people's stories, which are great too, it's like, oh, like I you know, was searching astral projection, then I came across MBT, but they, you know, were super into the paranormal, or, you know, you're like, I don't even know what that is, and you know, to go from that to you know, where you are today is just so cool to hear, and it really speaks to I don't know, like Tom talks about this readiness, right? That, you know, there's this way in which we're ready for the next step, even if that's not an intellectual awareness that we're having, and the system sort of just introduces in a very you know, small but unique way for a lot of people, and then it just has a landing pad and it just catches, and you know, to hear that journey, you know, and then you know, the whole reorganization. I'd love to hear a little bit about, you know, you're on the bus, right, and there's this, you know, whole reorientation, really, in the disorientation is really this reorientation to reality and what that actually is, and I'm curious, like, when that dust settled, so to speak, how would you like compare, like, you know, post process, where, you know, obviously we're always continuing to grow, but there was something markedly shifted there. You know, the dust settled, the disorientation, you know, sort of sorted itself. And who was Michael then versus before? Like, did you notice any differences then, or looking back now?
Yeah, for sure. And actually, speaking back to the forum, there was a thread and somebody had talked about that same kind of experience, and Tom had actually responded to that person about it, and talked about how it's fairly common and normal, and it, you know, it'll feel kind of disorienting for a while, but, you know, given enough time, you'll eventually, you know, feel normal again. And that's how I would say I feel right now. Is I've, you know, today for quite a while I feel quite normal, but certainly for a while there it was weird, and I am certainly different now than I was back then. I was always, like, thinking back through the years, I mean, I was very much kind of, I think, the target audience for Tom's My Big Toe is kind of like a very left-brained. I don't know about materialist necessarily, but I mean, I was raised Roman Catholic as a child, but I kind of over the years dismissed that and broke away from it. Never really became fully atheist because I felt like that was too far the other way of kind of a belief or a disbelief of it. Kind of more agnostic in that sense, not really knowing what was going on. But I always kind of had a curiosity about reality, so I really was into physics, just learning how reality works in this PMR. I was into computer science, so I was into kind of that virtual reality type space as well. Kind of grew up with that.
Totally.
So I just, when I saw Tom's approach to explaining or having a model of reality, it just really, really hit me just the right way. And I was like, oh, okay, this is something I can actually work through and grasp, because I had tried, other spiritual works in the past, and it just was too, I don't know, I couldn't make sense of it. It was too metaphorical, and I had nothing to kind of ground myself in. So I would read pages of different works, like maybe even something like Seth Speaks or something like that, and it would just lose me, and I would be like, well, I'm reading pages and none of it's really connecting with me, so I can't make sense of it. So I just kind of dropped that. I looked into there's some of that New Age material out there as well. I tried reading that, and it just couldn't work for me. So yeah, Tom's work really helped make sense of reality for me. And ever since reading that book, MBT, afterward, I've been able to come back to a lot of the spiritual texts and kind of more maybe right brain oriented, explanations of reality, and I've been able to actually make sense of it, and I accept the approach that they take, and I'm able to kind of at least understand what's going on there. So that's, I guess, one of the main ways I'm different. I'm definitely more open-minded to spirituality in general, and yeah, the flowery language.
Right, right, and I totally resonate with that too. That there's typically this dichotomy, or this either or of spiritual language that's very metaphorical, flowery, and then there's sort of the hard sciences and things that you can really comprehend and grasp, and yeah, this unique model that Tom really presents, that's an integration, a quite coherent integration of both. So it totally makes sense to me how that these left brain kinds of people that we are, that haven't completely shut the door to spirituality, there's some opening in some way for Tom's work. So it's just a great example, your journey there. And yeah, like you're saying about this season of life now being focused on not only engaging with MBT, but being of service, and we'll talk a little bit later about the early retirement stuff, because that's super interesting to me. And with these days that are happening now, there's early retirement, there's more time, more space. How does that look in terms of like your personal engagement with MBT for yourself, and then sort of the collective contributions that you're offering?
Yeah, so before that happened, I mean, I was, in my time, I felt pretty spread thin, so I didn't feel like I had a lot of time to kind of give back between my work and family. So having done that, now I feel like, okay, I've created some space in my life. Family still takes up a large chunk of that time for sure, but now I've at least got several hours a day where I'm going, okay, how do I, and I'm still figuring that out, to be honest. What do I do with that? Where can I be the most, productive or most helpful to others is kind of where my focus is right now. Not to say, like, working in my job, I was definitely helpful to others, and it was, it was rewarding in its own way. But over time, I felt less and less aligned with what I was doing there, and feeling like, okay, I can really, I feel like there's a lot of opportunity here where a lot of people don't understand reality like the way Tom does, and I feel like there's an opportunity there to share that more with others. And I'm kind of in a unique position where I can have the time and energy, still rather young enough to, get out there and try and, help people in whatever way I can in understanding what's going on here, what we're supposed to be doing here, because I know a lot of people struggle with that. And in a lot of ways, people in their day-to-day life don't have a lot of time to even think about that and just kind of go through the motions. So, that's kind of where my head is at right now. I'm still trying to figure out the details.
Love it, right? That sorting that's happening and probably has its own kind of evolution, right? Might look different at different times and different seasons of life, but just it's worth just saying, like, congratulations on early retirement, and that's something that is very much kudos to you. That takes planning and to use then that space. Most people like, oh, retirement, I'm just gonna play, and nothing wrong with that, but we need some good play in life. And you're like, how can I make a difference? Like, Tom has this way of understanding reality that really no one else has, and I want to help people connect with that and understand that, and to let that be one of your meditations, so to speak, for how you spend those free hours that you have is just awesome. And I've really enjoyed the interactions we've had, for instance, on the Discord community, the community that Andy Chu started, and just the ways of you're engaging with people there and supporting their personal processes and explorations has been just so enjoyable for me, as a fly on the wall, to sort of witness and jump in at times in support of, and also what's that?
Well, it's good to hear. Yeah. Glad to hear that.
100%.
I'm trying. I don't know if I'm making a difference, but I'll try and see what's going on. See what happens.
Oh, well, I think I said it in the introduction to this podcast. It's like, the gift is the being of, who we are, or, if it's not, then we're, of course, evolving, just letting that authenticity be more and more a light and example. And that's how I experience you, honestly, is that just warm engagement and support of people, and you're just being you. And so it really is enjoyable for me. And I feel like to use an analogy, I feel like I'm a bumblebee, and I'm going to different flowers and sort of picking up pollen. Like Andy will engage with people in certain ways, and I'm like, oh, like I kind of like how he did that, and go over here, and there's Carissa, or there's you, and so it's really not only enjoyable for me, but beneficial to be in these spaces and receive something of the gift in the way everyone is being who they are. And speaking of, like you were saying, oh, I'm getting out there, and sharing, and I'm engaging, you're actually in a formal kind of somewhat capacity of doing that with the MBT Volunteer Organization, which TT has started, and maybe I'll do a chat with TT in the future to introduce that to our audience. But for now, as a means of short example of, or explanation of the MBT volunteer community, would you mind sharing a little bit about what that is and what you're up to within that organization?
Yeah, for sure. So Tom's, got an amazing body of work and knowledge, but he's only got so many hours in a day. So there's a lot of things that could be done with all of his material, and I think it started originally with translations or time stamping the YouTube videos. I can't remember which one came first, but basically there was a need, and that could be, served to help others process and understand my big toe, and there's other opportunities as well. So there was a need, and other people got together and started to help Tom out with those needs, and it's kind of eventually kind of formalized into this MBT volunteers group that TD's now helping run with you, Nathan. And I joined in the last, I think, what was it, 4 or 5 months ago. I saw a need to help out with the what we now call the social media nudging group, which is kind of a subgroup of the volunteers in general. And the main kind of goal or purpose of the nudgers is to go out there on social media and help other people that may or may not be aware of MBT, and kind of help them see some truth about reality, or something that my big toe talks about, and kind of help and maybe nudge them in a way to exploring my big toe in more detail. So instead of doing that kind of in an official social media capacity with representing my big toe officially, we kind of go out there just as individuals out there into various different communities, online or offline, that may have some sort of topical relation to what my big toe talks about, like out-of-body experiences, physics, virtual reality, astral projection, meditation, what's my purpose, that sort of stuff, and just go out there and engage with those communities, and try and naturally bring up my big toe when appropriate, and just help others, just bring awareness about what's going on here and what we're trying to do. So and really we're looking for as many members as we can get, and if that's something that interests you, be sure to reach out to the MBT volunteers group.
And I definitely want to just kind of second what you're saying there. If people are even remotely interested in exploring that, because we've had a few nudger meetings, so we'll get together. What is it, Michael? Every kind of quarter or something like that, we'll get together. And,
right now, yeah,
love it. And so we've had some of those meetings, and it's been really just personally enjoyable for me to connect with your team in those meetings, and to talk about, like, how do we want to go about this in a way that really, like you're saying, in this natural way, this more organic way of sharing, that brings value to people's journeys and experiences. And it really is this sort of attuned way of I contrast it so much with, like, like people going around knocking on doors with their pamphlets, like, hey, we got this church up the road, and it's just kind of doing it to everyone everywhere, or something like we're gonna really strategize on how to, like, sell this product or something. Like, this is none of those things. It's like, it's a very person to person individual basis that for our engagement in these communities, maybe MBT doesn't come up right away. We're just building relationships and engaging, and then because of who you are and who we are as a team, we value MBT and Tom's work, and if it seems relevant or helpful, we're not going to feel shy either to say, hey, this is something we really enjoy. Like, would you be interested in exploring this? And people have joined the MBT community when people have done that, maybe in less formal capacities like this nudging project, but we have plenty of MBT stories where people are like, yeah, someone just felt free to talk about it on this forum or whatever, and that's how I learned about Tom. So would love to see folks come into your project more and join the team. It's a really fun team, and it's really meaningful work, just building relationships, getting the word about MBT out.
Yeah, it's tricky. I really don't want to proselytize or try and sell people on MBT. Like, that just doesn't doesn't sit right with me. And you're right, it's like, yeah, I don't know. I don't want to call out any specific religions out there, but there's definitely some that are pushier than others, and that kind of leaves a bad taste in people's mouths. So I don't want to approach it from that angle. But just naturally over the years, like I said, I've known about MBT over a decade now, and anybody who is even remotely open to the idea of some of these concepts, I would, even just before this volunteering community, I would try and nudge them towards MBT with a few successes here and there, and that's been great. Not everybody's ready for this sort of stuff, but there are people who are seekers, and you just aren't aware. And so if you can just help them, bring that awareness, then you're just adding value to their lives, and that's all we're really trying to do.
Right. And in MBT we talk about how it's the intention that matters, not necessarily what you do or aren't doing, and that intention carries an energy. We are linked up telepathically, inevitably, as consciousness, and we are all netted in that way. And I think I'll speak for myself, but maybe people listening to this can resonate too, that people can talk about what they're passionate about, and it can be experienced two very different ways depending on, like you're saying, I have this belief system that I think is something that whether people like it or not, they should really look at it, and it's kind of forceful, and it's not so interested in relationship and supporting the people they're talking to. It's like more about the belief system rather than the person, the individual, versus people who are just as passionate, and they're just sharing because they love what they're sharing about and they really care about it. And it's experienced completely different ways, those two different kinds of intentions. And that's definitely how I experience you and the atmosphere you've created in the nudging group. It's like, it's really more about, because you could think about it like, it's sort of fear-based to force something on people that aren't wanting something. That's being driven by a person's fear in some way. But it's also fear-based to be like, I care a lot about this thing, but I don't want to offend anybody, or I don't want to talk about it. Keep it to myself. And it's like MBT is all about being authentic. Being who you are. And it's like, if you care about something as well as care about another person, there's probably this middle way where it's just good for everyone, and people can hear about what we're talking about, and it doesn't obligate them or us to do anything. We're just sort of sharing something we like and seeing what happens from there. So I love this middle path, so to speak, that you're exemplifying here. And
I really like that term there, that middle path. I find that happens a lot in life in general, and I think I even heard Tom use it. What term did he use? Maybe thread the needle recently, where you've got so many of these life situations where you've got kind of two extremes that aren't the right way to do it or the right motivation, and I see that come up a lot even within myself, like just trying to find that middle way, that middle path with doing something. And it can be tricky sometimes. That's where the skill in life comes in. But that's the way to do it for sure.
Totally. And where my mind goes from talking about this is like, wow, actually this is really relevant for how we do life and relationship in general when we really care about something. Like I have a friend who is super into he's a quadriplegic, actually. He has an amazing story. Maybe I'll chat with him too, it'd be fun. But he has this amazing story of how he was born, fully abled, and then through an accident became a quadriplegic, and through a pretty cool story, learned to walk again, and he can't use a bike like how other people typically can, but he has this kind of bike that with the combination of like an electric bike motor that you also power a little bit with your hands and rotating a certain thing.
Right.
You sit down in it and then you go. Yep. And I actually really enjoy him just talking about that so freely because it's something he cares about. It's something that he's passionate about, and you can feel that passion and that positivity, and that's way different than him or someone like him saying like, every quadriplegic should just learn how to do it this way and be this way, and like try to force or project onto everyone that's been through something somewhat similar how he should do it. But if that's not his personality at all, it's like, like, this is my journey, this is my story, and he'll offer it really freely on his Instagram, and people resonate with it. There's this positive energy to it, and it really makes me think about what you're exemplifying as, for me, like just a way to live my life around just being positive, being myself, and just talking about my journey and who I am and what I've enjoyed, and that has no obligation on other people. I'm just shining my light, and people feel that. They feel the non-pressure, and it creates really rich conversation actually when everyone just expresses what they care about and who they are, and you get some really rich dialogue going. So that's something I'm taking away actually from this conversation I haven't thought about before, but is absolutely relevant to this volunteer work that you're heading up, and how it kind of builds basically a life skill or a way of kind of authentic operating in the world that's positive and non-pressuring.
Yeah, I guess that's living at the being level, right?
Yeah.
Tom likes to talk about that. Just as an example for me, been able to bring up MBT with others, just, I guess, one way was through meditation. Just because I do meditate, I try to meditate twice a day, and that comes up in life a lot, with interacting with friends and family, and so naturally, they might be curious about it, so then I can talk about it, and that sort of just naturally happens. And if they're interested, I can point them to some resources, and if they're not, that's okay. We move on. So, yeah, it's just it's something I've been really trying to work on, is really just kind of living at that being level, and figuring out what that is, and just going with it.
Yeah. And for those who don't know or are just starting to explore Tom's work, this being level, this is really who we are at our core. And this is something, Michael, that I've really enjoyed just in passing our connection around with, like, tracking dreams, for instance, or paying attention to our emotions, or really getting to know, like, who is Nathan? I ask myself, not the person that I think I am or the story that I tell myself, but who I really am authentically, and those passionate emotions, positive ones included. It's like, that's really who I am at my core, and can I live from that place? Rather than trying to anticipate how people think of me, or how I can manipulate a situation for some kind of outcome or benefit, but just showing up for all of life and just being consistently who I am at that, like you're saying, at that being level. That's been a powerful help from Tom's work for my life, as someone who has really hidden behind a sort of facade because I was so afraid, fear of rejection and not being good enough, that I would try to manipulate subtly, people's perceptions. And, like, that's exhausting, to, like, always take on, how people feel about you. And so it's been a massive support for me in Tom's work. And so appreciating you bringing up, this being level, how this is absolutely relevant to just living our life and just speaking what we care about and what we enjoy, and what we think about the world.
Definitely. I'm right there with you. With I used to, and I probably still do, but I like to think I'm a little better at it now. I was very much in my head, intellectualizing everything, planning out situations in my head, trying to manipulate how certain outcomes would go, and it was very stressful, and very fearful, and I kind of saw it as almost like an ideal. I guess I was just confused about it, but I almost saw, thinking about, I don't know if you're familiar with Star Trek and, Spock, just
Sure.
kind of that, where emotions are kind of a lower form of being, and you want to kind of suppress that because it's it's an animalistic thing that isn't as good as your higher level intellectualization of everything. And I feel like a lot of society must have that belief, just because it is so culturalized, even in something like Star Trek, right? And I kind of latched onto that for many years, and it's taken a long time to kind of let that go. So yeah, I find that interesting.
Yeah, it totally is, right? And sort of the extremes of our culture, right? Like, there's the berserker, wild man, or wild person in general, and then there's sort of the stoic, completely rational, and not many examples in culture of like the balanced person, that's fully emotionally engaged with life and authentic, and also the rationality is a tool, or it's a balanced way of like engaging with the world and in a coherent fashion that makes some sense with the physical laws of the universe, with the societal structures we're in. It's like I can navigate structured environments with the logic, but also fully feeling life and engaging. So yeah, I think that's a really exciting exploration for, especially just speaking as males who are left brain, which I resonate with when you were talking about that. And coming into MBT's work through sort of a intellectual door, I had to revolve around Tom's work for years before I could actually engage with it at a being level. I found MBT in 2011, and I just stalked the forum for years in the YouTube videos, but I wasn't even consistently applying the practice or reading his book for a long time, just because I had to sort of orbit around it for a long time, because there was this way in which I was building my own pathways to my own authenticity, because it was sort of scary in there. Who is this person? But I could intellectually understand Tom's work, and then something about Tom himself being an example. And I like how Tom says it, the best leadership is just being an example. And Tom being this example of like a really balanced male. Like, here's this guy that, super rational and intellectual, and this physicist who has a model. Mm-hmm. And, I was just listening the other day to an interview where the interviewer was ending the session with Tom, and he's like, we do this fun thing with all our guests, and it's glossolalia. We ask our guests to like do gibberish nonsense as a way of ending on a light, humorous note, and I was like, how is Tom gonna, do this? And Tom's like, this is making me laugh, and then he starts doing it. He starts saying all this gibberish, and it's like, there's this guy that's like also extremely playful, and he's laughing, and there's humor throughout his book, and there's such deep care for people and emotion, and he's just this balanced guy.
I must have missed that one. You'll have to send me a link to that if you've got it. I didn't see that one. That sounds pretty fun. Yeah, and his books are pretty funny at times. It's mixed in there, which is really nice.
Yeah, definitely a sense of humor. And yeah, I had missed that interview too, and someone turned me onto it. They sent me the Facebook or the YouTube link rather, and so I find myself, just out of my own personal curiosity, speaking kind of like the external world and the rational world. That has its own gift. This intellectual aspect of us. And one of the things you mentioned that is super interesting to me is this like early retirement movement. Mm-hmm. And so would you mind sharing a little bit of like how that journey started, and anything you want to share around that? Super intriguing.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Okay. I mentioned it because I figured it is kind of an interesting non-standard way of going about living life. So but yeah, I guess if I take it all the way back to the beginning, my parents are immigrated to Canada from Poland in the 80s during the Cold War, and communism was falling apart in Poland at the time. They really didn't see much of a future there, so they escaped Poland on their wedding honeymoon and went on vacation and never came back. They went to vacation in Greece and then applied for I guess, political refugee status and tried to get into Canada, the U.S., and Australia. And it was just kind of a, whoever would accept us first, would they would go, right? So they were there in Greece for just over a year, and that's when I was born. And Canada happened to accept them first, so that's where we went. And they came to Canada not knowing any English. Their formal education, didn't count for anything, and they had me, like a 1-year-old baby, right? So life was tough for them, especially in the beginning. My mom challenged the nursing exams eventually, and my dad did a bunch of different jobs, but did some gardening and landscaping in the beginning too. And kind of pulled themselves up by their bootstraps over time.
Yeah. Whoa.
And by the time
incredible.
by the time I was a teenager, we were thoroughly middle class, which was fine. But we were definitely poor when I was young, and that kind of really affected me. And I guess they were always kind of worried about money to some extent. So that I guess I kind of absorbed that. I was like, well, no, I don't want this to be a problem in my life. So I was always kind of, in pursuit of at least some sort of financial stability. That kind of changed over time. My parents were very capitalist because they, they didn't have a good experience with communism. So they were always doing kind of business type stuff on the side as well, and I got involved with some of that stuff and learned through that. So I tried various different things, and that kind of always stuck with me, and had various success in different things, but still kind of ended up going the standard sort of route with a university education, getting a solid stable job, but also kind of realized that kind of locks you in. There's sort of a ceiling to your income. It's pretty hard to break through, depending on what you're doing. But for most people, there's depending on what you're doing, there's a ceiling there. And I was like, well, no, there's still got to be a better way. And was doing different things, but my wife actually, just because we were talking about these sorts of things, she was familiar with this subculture called financially independent, retire early, which is, or FIRE for short. And there's some sites out there, if you just Google that term, she told me about Mr. Money Mustache is a popular blogger that talks about that sort of stuff. So I dove into that and learned all I could about it. And then basically what it boils down to is just kind of aggressively saving your money, trying to live life kind of as minimalistic as possible, so that you create some headroom between what your income is, your income here and your expenses here, right? And you try and make that as big as you can, and then you just invest that difference. And that's basically what we did. For, what was it? I've always been kind of trying, but we really got serious about it only about, 6 or 7 years ago. And did some investing, took some riskier bets with some of that money in Tesla was one of the stocks, which has done really well.
Nice,
And I'm really passionate about Tesla too, and electrification and sustainability and all that sort of stuff. And a little bit into cryptocurrency too, which is which has also done pretty well for me. It's funny, that's another thing I got into right in the ground floor, actually right around the time of MBT, right around 2010 was when Bitcoin started, and I learned about it. And actually,
for not even pennies, right? It
didn't have a price.
It's amazing.
It didn't even have a price at the time. So I was mining it, with my home computer, like with my GPU, right? And I was like, well, this is kind of silly. It's costing me money. It's wrecking my computer. It's using a lot of electricity, right? It doesn't have a price. Who's going to buy this, right? Like, why would somebody buy this? So, I've got this expense and no upside, really, in that sense, right? Which I was obviously wrong about. So I just kind of abandoned it for years. And it came up again, at work, because I'm in the computer kind of IT space as well. So, it would come up just kind of naturally in work a lot, 'cause some of my friends were into it. And kind of dismissed it. And it was pretty persistent. And eventually in 2016 or 2017, around there, I was finally like, okay,
Nice.
this clearly isn't going away. Despite the expenses of mining the coins, there's still enough fundamental value to it and speculative value to it that, it's not going away, and it kind of brings in more people every time in these cycles, these waves of ups and downs. So I was like, well, I'm going to try and catch a wave, I guess. And yeah, and so I'm also pretty passionate about that stuff, and I'm participate in specifically Ethereum is what I'm into. Yeah,
Awesome.
and so between those two things, eventually had enough. COVID hit. Was working from home for a while. And kind of liked that freedom that gave me. And eventually my workplace was like, well, we got to bring you back into the office. And my financial situation was quite different. So I was like, well, I don't think so. Sorry. And quit. And yeah, that was in January of this year. So yeah, that's kind of
Oh, that's fantastic, man. That's fantastic. There's a particular content creator on YouTube who also helps people with financial independence and just financial education in general. And he has much the same story. Like parents came from very little and then grew up poor, and that being in some ways sort of a positive catalyst for I want to have freedom financially, and to have your story of how you did that in partnership with your wife, to really create that for yourselves is just fantastic. And to hear, I love it, the sound money principles combined with some risks that have some fundamentals behind them. Like there's real solid rationality behind all those investments, and to land there.
Yeah, the key really is to figure out how to get your expenses down a lot lower than your income. I mean, it depends on your income too. Of course, if you're making more money, it's easier. But typically, also people that make more money tend to just spend more money. So if you can just kind of find that arbitrage, I live in the Midwest of Canada, so it's a little bit cheaper living here to begin with, which helped. But I was also doing things like biking to work. We have a car mainly because it gets really cold here in the winter times, especially, and for long distance trips. But generally, the car would often just sit, all week. We maybe drive it once a week, kind of a thing. We'd be biking to work, even when it was, minus 30 degrees, minus 40 degrees, winter outside. I was still biking to work, and that comes with its own challenges or whatever, and kind of weird. But there's again another subculture of people that do that. So just even learning how to do that sort of stuff, be willing to kind of take that sort of change in lifestyle. We even just walk to get the groceries at the time. Right. There's all sorts of different kind of hacks you can apply, and you can really. It's amazing how little you can live on if you really try. And I mean, since then we've kind of gotten less extreme with it. We've kind of especially with kids. I mean, try and do this before you have kids if you want to do it, because kids add a lot of complication to that.
Sure.
And it'll easily raises your expenses up many-fold. So depending on where you live too. But it's I like talking about it just because there's not. If people are willing to listen, just because there aren't too many people, kind of like MBT, it's something that you maybe people don't necessarily talk about at least at a casual level.
Right, right, and I love that this is something that is something you're passionate about, because this is a real aspect of life we all have to reconcile ourselves with in some way, and maybe even reconcile is not the best word, because there's opportunity for it to be a tool. Like, it's just a neutral thing, like anything. It could be a tool for like a greater, more purposeful life, like what you're living now, right? It's like, wow, it gives you the freedom, like that financial independence, to be of service and explore your own spiritual unfolding as well as supporting others in theirs. And we have examples, and for instance, Bob Monroe was an extremely business savvy person, and that really allowed him to be part of this impulse into the world of spiritual exploration, and out of body in particular, as well as other ways. And it's like, wow, money can actually be extremely positive.
Oh, for sure, for sure. Yeah, it does get quite a bit of a bad rap out there, especially I find these days with the younger generation. I'm a millennial. I'm kind of an elder millennial, but yeah, like capitalism, especially these days, has a really bad rap, and there's a lot of push towards how good socialism and stuff like that is, which I'm not necessarily against or anything. But now that I've kind of explained some of my life backstory here, there's a lot of hesitation on my part with communism and those sorts of ideals. So it's a tough time, because I feel like, yeah, there are really good things about pulling yourself up by your bootstraps and working hard, and having businesses, having the freedom to do those things, not having the government control everything. Yeah, not that I'm against, I live in Canada. We have nationalized healthcare and stuff like that, which is great. It has its own set of issues. That's a whole other conversation. But I just feel like, yeah, there's a lot of positivity here, and it's not like I'm just trying to want to buy an island and just kind of sit back and relax. That was never my goal. It was more about just having the optionality of kind of being able to do what I can to kind of make the world a better place in the way that I kind of uniquely see that I can do that, rather than just kind of slotting into a job somewhere that I maybe have skills for, but maybe isn't quite the best fit for me. And it's really hard, especially as you get older, to kind of break out of that. Like, because kind of once you're kind of set in that lane, it's pretty tough to get out of there. So that was always kind of a goal of mine, and I'm glad it was many years in the making. So I'm kind of glad that I'm here now, and it's been great so far. It's presented its own set of challenges, because now all of a sudden, kind of being used to having that steady 9-to-5 job Monday to Friday, it's like, oh, I've got all this this time back. What am I going to do with it? And applying the principles of MBT, it's like, I really gotta make sure I'm doing the right things for the right reasons. What am I doing with my time? Because before it was easy. Oh, I'm just going to be a servant to my job. I'm going to do what's needed of me there, and that was generally pretty straightforward day to day of what needed to be done. But now it's much more open-ended. So yeah, it's an interesting challenge, and yeah, I wish more people could experience that, or strive to experience that, because it's very empowering.
And that led to a curiosity
I just
for
lost your
those
voice.
who are listeners. Oh,
Okay.
just,
Yeah, I think I
got
hear
me?
you now. Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
okay, great. Thanks for letting me know. Well, it leads to this curiosity I have for those who are, interested in having that independent success for themselves, or those who maybe have a different perspective, but they're willing to learn in general. Like how might actually I be able to utilize the current system as it is to be of benefit not only to myself but to other people? Where would you we send folks, or not only resources online, but things that you would want to share. So it could be resources or just things you thought of in your own way of looking at things. We've talked about some of those, of course, already. But yeah, if there was like a brand person to all this that was interested in exploring more, how would you speak to them?
Yeah, that's a good question. You cut out a little bit there, so I think I got the essence of the question. Um, yeah, kind of what I've said already. The key point is saving significantly less than, or spending significantly less than what you're making is kind of the main key. There's many paths. Like a lot of people, a common path towards financial independence is just having a business and using that business to grow and scale. Because really, with a business, your limits are much less defined. Like as an employee, you're typically you've got a salary cap, and that really limits the upside. So I mean, you can always try and get promotions or get more skills. So there is some upside there, but I think the most common path for people is doing it through business, which has its own set of skills and resources to go into. But and that's actually not the path I took. However, I'm growing up as a kid with my dad. We tried lots of different businesses, and most businesses failed. We had some success with some of them, but nothing really earth-shattering or life-defining. So I ended up, like I said, kind of abandoning that and going the more traditional route, while still trying to find a path towards this financial independence. And that's really the whole, like I mentioned, that whole FIRE movement. If you look it up, that's what I would recommend to people. Specifically, probably the most accessible resource is that Mr. Money Mustache blog. I think there's one post in particular that talks about the simple math behind early retirement. I think if you look up that, it explains it out pretty well, pretty concisely. And just once you kind of look at that, look at the graphs or look at the math a little bit, it's not too difficult to understand. But once you kind of see it, you're kind of like, oh, I see. This is why, a typical person in a job the typical recommendation is, save, maybe 10% of your income and invest that. And if you do the math on that, that's like, oh, okay, assuming some sort of typical returns from the stock market over 30 or 40 years, you'll get to some level of money that is maybe a decent nest egg for somebody to retire on. But if you start tweaking with that and say, hey, for years we saved over 50% of our income, and once you start working the math that way, it's like, oh, you can, within 5, 10, 15 years of that sort of path, you can end up at a nest egg where you're like, oh, this is sustainable, and until I die. There's some assumptions baked into that. There's something called the safe withdrawal rate that a lot of people in the financial independent community, the FIRE community, talk about, which is like you can only withdraw 3 to 4% of your nest egg a year while it's invested in the stock market, just in order to be able to survive any sort of downturns or recessions or things like that. So you can't withdraw too much, otherwise when it dips down, you're taking out too much of that money, and then when it comes back up, you don't have enough, and you might run out, which is not something you want to have happen when you're 65 and all of a sudden you're out of money. That's because it's a little bit tougher to get back into the workforce then. So there's that kind of main concept, and there's a one book in particular that was pretty fun for me. It was called Early Retirement Extreme, which came before Mr. Money Mustache. It takes it to a whole other level, where the guy retired in 5 years making less than 40 grand a year. I think he was like a graduate student for a chunk of that as well. So
Wow.
yeah, that's kind of where I point people to it.
Cool. For that,
Are you there,
just to
Nathan?
give folks a place to start. Yeah. Um, because
And they can
again,
always
this
actually
is
always reach
all.
out to me as well.
I'm so glad you said that because that was, we're working at the time here, and there's so much more to chat about. There's this maybe up to at some point in the future. So, as we're coming to our natural close here, I'm you know, just been glued to our conversation here because much of it, there's been personal resonance, interest. So thank you again, Michael, for this. And if folks want to get in contact with you about what we've talked about, what would be the best way to reach you?
That's a good question. Um, well, they can always send me an email for starters with my name, michael.saganski@gmail.com. But I'm also on the Discord for My Big Toe as well. Uh, my handle is just at Michael, and if they join the MBT Volunteers, I'm on there as well. Also, you can find my name on Twitter. I'm not too active there posting, but I do read, and I would respond to DMs if people want to reach out to me that way too.
Cool. Perfect. Perfect. We'll have all of those links and ways of getting a hold of you in the description for this video, and um, also I'll include the information for TT and the organization if folks are feeling inspired or at least curious to explore the nudging project or the facilitator of. We'll have the contact information for TT below, so you can be with TT and say you're interested in getting connected with Michael and the nudging project. It's just a fantastic project. So thank you again, Michael, for really initiating that project and the impact that it's having for the greater good. And it's really fun for me to learn about, just the wider context and background of how you came to MBT and how you're in a season of life that has a lot of spaciousness for serving because of your wise investing and implementation of certain processes that are available to anybody curious and want to start playing with a little bit of financial independence. So as we're wrapping up here, this will be just off the cuff, free association. So anything that comes out is great. Like, what would you want to speak to, the audience here as we're wrapping up? That would be um, one of the more meaningful insights of your personal spiritual journey with MBT and life in general that you would want to have a piece of advice or encouragement to folks. So something that's sort of influenced by your own personal experience of everything we've talked about.
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess I would say, I mean, if you're interested in learning more about my Big Toe or spirituality, you can definitely do it. I mean, I giving my backstory here, I was definitely kind of one of the furthest possible starting points from understanding this stuff, and it took me some time and effort, but I was able to. I think I was able to finally kind of grasp it, and I think anybody can do it. If I can do it, you can do it too. So there's hope for everybody. um, and yeah, I think this rabbit hole goes down pretty far, and I think a lot of us are really just kind of scraping the surface of what Tom is talking about. So I really hope we can all, um, keep going and just work hard and see where all of this can take us. And Tom's also not going to be around forever, so I'm hoping we can kind of do our best to keep the model and the message going far into the future.
Yeah, yeah. I'll echo that. Just thank you for sharing here as we're ending here. Michael Saganski, thank you so much for this time again and being who you are and yeah, real joy to have had this time. So personally as well as I think teaching this will really benefit. So thank you again for it.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been great. It's been fun to do this.
Yeah, fun for me too. Ciao for now, Michael, and be in touch as always, and I'll feel free to do the same as we're doing our thing out there in the world. Thank you for being the inspiration. I mean, clearly it's time to end. I started having a from my throat here. Perfect timing. Thank you again. I'll see you out there in the wider world, my friend. Yeah, ciao.
See you later.